When we get to hammers, we have a lot of different choices. Hammers are sized in head weight. So for instance, you would buy a 16-ounce hammer, a 10-ounce hammer, an 8-ounce hammer. And all these hammers have varying degrees of usability. The lighter the hammer, the less damage will be done. But also the work will take longer with a lighter hammer. When we're looking at large hammers, you have to be very careful that the weight of this thing does not damage the material you're hitting. When we're talking about hammers also, we have choices in handles. This particular hammer here has a fiberglass handle. Very durable, doesn't shatter, quite light, and it actually reduces the entire weight of the hammer itself. Talking about this one here, wooden handle. Wooden handles have a lifespan, so you really have to make sure with these, again, the twisting action, looking for cracks, and also the feeling of the buzz you would get from a cracked handle. Sheet metal workers tend to have, at least in the commercial end of it, sheet metal hammers with steel handles. That's simply because they don't break as often. It does add weight to the hammer and it makes it a little bit more awkward, but they offset that by putting a fairly decent handle on them. And there are a lot of good makes of hammers out there, and you can spend a lot of money on a hammer, and to get a good one, I would suggest that sheet metal workers buy the best possible one for the job they're working on. When we're talking about hammers, we're talking about head styles. Every hammer has a different function. Large hammers are for heavy gauge, small hammers for light gauge. Large faces for smoothing, small faces for setting. Taking a look at a common hammer here, this is what's called a ball peen hammer. Peen refers to the backside of the hammer. All hammers have peens, and all hammers have faces. It should be remembered that the faces of the hammer are what are actually doing the work. So this face must be maintained as smooth as possible and as little chipping as possible around the outside edge. If the hammer has a chip or a flaw in the face, this will allow for what I call tattooing of the project. In other words, leaving marks every time you strike it. So maintain your hammers in good shape, especially the ones that you're going to use in the shop. The head weight on this one here is about a 12 ounce, okay? And that would be used for fairly light duty work. The peen on the back side of this might be used for hammering over a face on a rivet. As you can see, they come in different sizes. This one here would probably be a 20 ounce, and usually they're marked right on the head. 20 ounce would be used for driving very large objects, probably driving pins into shafts and that sort of stuff, okay? Doesn't have a lot of use in the layout part of our trade because it's far too heavy for doing most layout. Getting down to our typical sheet metal hammers, this one here is probably the most common of all sheet metal hammers. Notice the round face on it and the tapered peen on the back side. How I remember this one is, because it's round, it starts with the letter R. This particular hammer is called a riveting hammer. Riveting, round. This particular hammer is also a fairly light duty one, being a 12 ouncer. These ones go up to the 17, 18 ounce, but they do tend to get quite heavy. Another thing should be noticed about hammers is hammers should be sized for the person that's using them. A person with a small hand can't really handle a 20 ounce hammer that well, so perhaps a 12 ounce would be better for what they're doing. R, round, riveting. Next most common sheet metal hammer. This is the one you find in commercial applications. Square face. Square, S, setting. Setting hammers are used for driving in drive cleats and sliding slip cleats across. These particular hammers have a tapered peen on the backside as well, and sometimes it can be fairly sharp in here. That can be used for setting down double seams. These other hammers here are specialty hammers. These are body hammers. We don't see them often in the field, but you do see them in the shop. If you take a look at them, large round face, fairly lightweight with a sharp peen on the back side. This one here happens to be a pointed peen. This particular peen can be used for moving in material into a tight location that would be difficult other than having a sharp pointed edge. I've also seen these used for chipping wells. Not a good plan. There are chipping hammers. This is not one of them. These hammers tend to be very expensive and limited in use as far as field work, but really good for shop work. Another variation of this one is a larger body hammer. If you take a look on the back side of this. The peen on this one is curved down. This would be great for setting down, again, double seams into a corner. Large, smooth face on the front. Remember, when you're striking something with this thing should be harder than what you're striking. By that I mean you should never take a piece of hardened steel and hit it with a hammer. Putting marks into the face of this will defeat the purpose of this particular hammer. Another variation on the body hammer. This one here has a smooth face on one side, but if you notice on the other side, it's quite dimpled. This particular action, driving with this, will tend to shrink material down as it drives it into an edge, something like a crimp would do on a piece of pipe. If we were to have to strike something like a center punch, a ball peen would be a good choice. Taking the center punch, aligning it where you want to, and then striking it with a single firm blow in this method. Should never hold the object you're going to strike this way, as if you miss, you'll hit your back of your hand. The other thing that should be remembered is because these are hardened surfaces, they must be maintained. As well as the hammer, we should also grind the edges off on the center punch to eliminate the mushrooming that comes off. If you were to hit a mushrooming edge with a hammer, you run the risk of driving shards of metal into your hands. Hammers. Different uses, different applications, different weights. It all depends on the job you're using and the application that you're in.